this. You started off as a graphic designer. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. Self-taught
So,
graphic designer.
and so what year did your career start, and what were the job prospects like back then?
Well, I would say that, so I started on my own where I used to design like these magazines, and like I kind of taught myself, graphic design, and I would do these, I was a big Prince fan, so I would do these Prince fanzines, and I had a fan club, and some guys that even like come to me to design albums. I was 16, I didn't realize they were bootlegs, and then pretty quickly I realized they were bootlegs, but there was no money, but it was like, oh, cool, I can design a cover for this, and
Right.
being oblivious to the fact that these guys were making so much money and just using the fact that I was a fan, whatever. But it was practice, and then
Yeah. And these
I
are
moved to
print, right? These fanzines, you're doing print graphic design at this point.
yeah, Prince print graphic design.
Print
It's for the
graphic design
singer,
for Prince.
the singer Prince, and it was in print. Yeah,
Yeah.
so Prince and Prince, and so basically, I was always kind of like teaching myself stuff, designing fake covers, and actually my first job that I got in New York. So I went to NYU,
Hmm.
and so I started like teaching myself graphic design when I was in LA. Probably I used to make those little cassette mixes and stuff for friends and girlfriends, and so I would always do covers, and um, so that was probably when I was like 14, 15, 16, and then went to Cal State Northridge in LA, and then transferred from there to NYU in New York. And basically, I had to have a job, to live in New York, because New York's
Yeah.
an expensive city, and I couldn't just like call home for money. So I started, looking at job prospects, and I knew I wanted to be a graphic designer. Photography was like a little hobby, but I didn't think it would ever be my profession at the time. And
Right.
so I basically created a portfolio of all stuff I wanted to accomplish. So it would be like a Marvin Gaye cover, a Stevie Wonder cover, a Prince cover, a Rolling Stone movie posters, all this stuff. And then I went to these job interviews, and it was basically like a completely fake portfolio, but it was my work. Like I designed the stuff, but it just none
Right.
of it had actually come to fruition. So, I brought it to a couple places, and then I went to this place called Gray and Gustafson in New York on Lafayette Street.
Yeah.
And the guy's looking at all this stuff, and the job was for, a graphic designer for clothing brands, for like these pop-up brands that they would do with J.C. Penney's and Macy's and stuff. So the guy's like, this stuff is so cool. It's like not really what we're doing here, but I'm impressed that you've done all these covers for all these big people, and you seem so young. I was like 19 at the time or something.
Right.
And I was like, well, they're not really for the people. They're for this interview, and the guy's like, wait a minute. So you came in here with a portfolio of all fake stuff? I was not fake, but yeah. And he's like, okay, you're hired. He's like, that takes a lot of balls. And so that was my first job. So, and the thing is, I was going to NYU full time. So I would go to work, like, I would take classes early in the morning. Like I think my first class was like 6 something a.m. And then I would get out at 9, go to work, and then at 5:15 or 5:30, I would have classes till 11 something p.m. every day.
Wow.
So full-time job, full-time classes, and so it taught me a lot of discipline, like getting through that schedule. And also, it's around the time where I basically started never sleeping, which is my normal sleep schedule.
And then your
As I
normal sleep
yawn, I
schedule
said
is
the word
none.
sleep and I yawn. Yeah. So, and so from then, I started getting, the word was out. Like people started saying, like, this kid is doing all this cool stuff. Let's try to hire him. So I got, a couple
Well,
companies called me. Yeah,
hold on.
go ahead.
So unpack that a little bit. So how did
Okay.
word get out, right? So I love the fact that you said, look, I don't have the portfolio that I want, so I'm gonna design the portfolio that I want, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
use that as a pitch, right? And that gets you your first gig, and then that
Right.
starts to grow from there. And then word gets out. Tell me, I mean, we're talking about the year we discussed before we hit record that you and I are the same age. So
Yeah.
19, 20 years old, we're talking about it's 1992. 1993, right?
This would be around 93. Yeah.
Okay, so
92.
but 1992, 93, right? There's no internet. There's
No.
no there's no YouTube, there's no online anything, right? How is word getting out in 1992,
So
93 about you?
what you had back in the days, especially for the fashion industry, you have these fashion trade shows like with Magic in Vegas, and Première Vision in Paris, or the Who's Next, and all these things. And so when this company would present all these brands, you'd have other brands that would walk by and say, "Hey, this is pretty cool."
Right.
So what happened is a couple different companies, including like Abercrombie and Fitch and American Eagle Outfitters, and there was a company called FOB. There was also a company called Aeropostale,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
this guy Jay Schottenstein owned the company, and wanted to meet me. And basically they made me an offer, which at the time, being like 22 or whatever,
Yeah.
was kind of surreal. And when I went in there, I was like, this looks like 1978. Like, this is not a good look. Like, 73 might have been a good look, but 78, it's kind of the big eagle logo on the stores and all
Wrong
that.
part of the 70s.
Yeah.
You're using here.
I was working with a guy named Michael Leedy at the time, who was my boss. And so basically he had me come in and like rebrand. And to this day, when I'm in a mall, I see my logos and all that stuff still, 20 years later or more. At a certain point, I asked myself, I think subconsciously, like, is this what I really want to do? Like, do I want both my parents are fashion designers, and I grew up in it, but it was never something I was really passionate about. But at this point, I was like in demand. I got a call from Nike, and Nike was like, hey, we're really interested in hiring you. And I remember so they flew me out to Portland, and I remember coming into what felt like, 2001 Space Odyssey, like the offices, and everybody looked like clones. Everybody was wearing the same shoes and everything. And I remember thinking to myself, like, is that really my passion? And at the same time, a friend of mine calls me from LA and is like, hey, there's an article in I think LA Weekly about Quentin Tarantino, and he's working on this movie called Jackie Brown.
Yeah.
So this is now 97. And in the article about Jackie Brown, it mentions that Quentin is working on a book on blaxploitation films. And my friend was like, isn't that what you were doing? And he's like, I'm sorry, man, can't compete against Tarantino. And this is like his last movie at this point was Pulp Fiction, so he's like king of the world.
It's as big as it gets. Yeah.
Yeah. So I go into like a full on depression, because I was like, this was my idea, and you can't compete, And at the time, my ex, who was my children's mother, my ex-wife, is every day is like, just contact him, like reach out to him, And I'm like, yeah, right, okay, you reach out to Quentin Tarantino, like, yeah, we just pick up the phone, But a really good lesson in listening to the women in your life, and I picked up the phone. And I found the number for his production company, A Band Apart, and called this, cold call. I started calling every day, like, I'd like to talk to Quentin Tarantino, like, and finally, I've told this story before, but it's funny. Like, finally, this woman picks up the phone. She's like, okay, give me your phone number and please stop calling, So the next day, and this is again, the lessons are the same. Like, if you don't take action, if you're not ballsy, nobody's going to come knocking on your door to be like, hey, you want to do this book for us? Because nobody knows in that world, nobody knew who I was, and nobody knew that I had this collection. And like you said, there was no internet like there is now, where people can see my Instagram and be like, oh wow, this guy collects all this stuff. And so the next day, this guy calls me. His name is Jerry Martinez, and he's like, "Hey, you Matthew?" Yeah, I'm Jerry. I'm the one doing the book. And he's just like, "What you got?" And I'm like, "Okay, there it is." So I start talking about what I have, and he says, "Well, what do you do? Where do you live?" I live in New York. I work for American Eagle Outfitters as an art director. And at that point, I'd gotten some kind of promotion, and they're like, the guy's like, well, it's too bad you don't live in LA, because, we're doing this book here. And well, nice talking to you. And I said, well, listen, I'll quit this job today. Like, I'll come out to LA. Like, just give me a week or something to tidy things up here, And the guy like totally freaked out. He's like, okay, bye, hangs up. And I'm like, shit, I like scared them away. But the next day he calls me again. He's like, hey, were you serious about coming to LA? And, because at this point, I think I emailed the guy a bunch of pictures of posters I had or something. So he saw that I was for real, And So I said, yeah, absolutely. And then next to him, he's in a car. He's calling me. It was like kind of loud. I could hear the freeway or whatever. And next to him, I hear somebody doing like Blaxploitation radio spots, like, Pamela Greer is Foxy Brown. I'm like,
Right.
I thought he was listening to like some radio spots or something. And then I realized that's Quentin Tarantino. He's like right next to the guy who's calling me all of a sudden. And so I'm like, wow, this is kind of crazy. Like, there it is. And so I tell the guy, he's like, okay, well, come by Friday, come by the office. This is where our office is. So this was like on a Monday or Tuesday. I'm in New York, they're in LA.
Right.
And it was on Beverly. And so I'm like, okay, I'll be there. So we can talk, not so we can start working, but just so we can talk like an interview.
Right.
So I fly out. Yeah, I tell my boss or whatever that I've got a family emergency in LA or whatever it is. My mom is in LA, so I was like, I gotta go see something. So I'm taking Friday off. I go there, I show up. This woman is like, yes, who are you? I say my name. She's like, oh my God, like she's the woman from the phone, She's like, what are you doing here? I said, I have an appointment with Jerry Martinez. They called me the other day, and so she's like, you do? Okay, hold on. And then like she calls Jerry, and Jerry's not there, and she puts him on the phone and is like, hey. I'm like, hi, I'm here. He's like, well, we didn't think you were actually going to come. Well, no, if you tell me to be there Friday, I'm going to be there Friday.
Right.
So long story short, I end up designing this book, working with them. And by being there, I end up quitting my job with like a 10-day notice or something, because they played tough in LA. And it's like, well, if you want to do this, we need you back here in a week or 10 days. And so I left my 6-figure salary and went and did a project that over, I think, 8 months of work paid me like $7,500.
Wow.
and
Jeez.
So it was a big risk, but that's where my heart was. And I had to just decide. At that time, I didn't have kids yet. I was just like, fuck it, I'm just going to do this. And it's a passion project.
Look, and there's a theme here, right? There's a theme here of obviously of hard work, right? And there's a theme here of aspiration and not letting the realities of the aspirational goals get in the way, right? So you didn't have the portfolio you wanted, so you designed it, right? And then you used that to get a gig, right? You didn't want to lose working on a well-received, book like this because somebody else that's more well-known than you was doing it. So you injected yourself into that conversation. And even though they didn't necessarily initially want you in that conversation.
Or need me. I didn't know they needed me, but
right. And then they brought you in as well. So tell me this. So today, right? Today, like a lot of your stuff. So you're shifting into photography and the music industry, right? At this point, right? So there's a ton of stuff. Why the music industry, and then why photography?
Well, music is my life. I was always collecting records. I was always obsessed with music since the time I was a little kid. I started courting people at labels, and how do I meet artists, and I wanted to design. I collected albums, so it was a natural thing for me to want to design album covers, because I started collecting the albums because of the covers. Like before I even knew what music was on a record, I used to buy records based on the cover. And that's how I got a lot of my collection initially, especially like soul, funk, jazz stuff, because I was always so attracted to like these 60s, 70s Black imagery, and Paris, that was a big thing. Paris was the opened the floodgates for jazz and opened the doors that were closed in America for so many artists. And so there's such a love in France for Black music of the 50s and 60s and 70s. And so I got a lot of my stuff, going to flea markets with my dad on weekends, which I still do when I go to Paris. Knowledge and collection. It's not something where you can just go to Google and quickly Google everything. It's like you have to know this stuff, because a lot of stuff is really obscure and you're not going to find it. And if you're going to look on Wikipedia, half the stuff's going to be wrong anyway. We started this thing called the Funk Lab, and we would meet at the Polygram offices, and we'd all bring our records, rare records, and we'd listen to stuff, and it was like a nerd fest. And we did a first thing I think we did that came out was a thing called Funk on Film, which was Exploitation soundtracks compilation, and I designed the artwork. I'd already been designing album covers for independent artists, because I used to also manage artists, and so there was a band called Sky Juice that I was managing from Montreal.
Sky Juice. Nice.
They were the best, and Frankie Selector was the lead singer. You know, he's a solo artist now, but
Oh yeah, nice.
Montreal is great. And at a certain point, I'd get the phone calls from another label like, "Oh, I love
Right.
this thing you did. You know, can you design our record, or can you design this series?" And BMG was a big thing. I started working with them, and you know, that was a lot of projects for many years. And photography, I always did as a hobby. It was never a professional thing.
Right.
And then I basically started doing, again, same thing as the design. I was doing all this indie stuff, and I had been doing a lot of major label stuff with design for all the major labels. But as far as photography, it was like, oh yeah, you just shoot it. I love that you do all this stuff. I connected into the soundtracks world.
So I wanted to ask you about that, because I read that about you in your bio, and it said soundtrack designer. What is a soundtrack designer?
It just means I design all the physical soundtracks, you know, the special editions and the album. And so they'll give you like the key art. They'll only give you like one image of the key art, the movie poster, and then develop the whole rest of the package and posters and ads and whatever goes with it.
So then how do you transition? So, I mean, you're doing a tremendous amount of photography with Dave Chappelle, with Lenny Kravitz, right? So how does that kind of transition into this being seemingly your primary gig, no?
Now, yeah, although I'm still doing, you know, design. So I designed the 2009, so 11 years ago, I designed the Let Love Rule 20th anniversary release for Lenny. And so, you know, I've been consulting on the Prince stuff, and like, I'd also done that for Prince while he was alive. But like, so big thing for me is because probably my collection and everything, I always want to see albums being remastered, re-released with bonus tracks. And so I got to work on almost every Marvin Gaye release in the past 20 years, Stevie Wonder, James Brown.
So basically what's happening here is that the aspirational portfolio you created for yourself when you were 19 is now coming to fruition. You're actually...
I would say 97%, all of the things in that portfolio I've done. Every single artist I had, including Marley, including Prince, including, you know, or at least 100% if I count capacity of like, whether I photographed the people or designed, everybody in that portfolio I've done. Then I had a whole other new life in the comedy world, you know, with Dave and a bunch of other artists. Thanks to Dave, it's the same kind of thing, like doors opening other doors, you know. And
let me ask you a question. So look, so you've done all these things. You're building, like you said, opening other doors. One thing leads to the next, right? Word of mouth. So right now we are locked down, right? Global shutdown, coronavirus. There's no touring. There's no travel. There's no comedy tours. There's no music tours. How are the things that you've done up until now helping you stay busy, stay connected, keep improving, keep working, basically?
Well, so all the work on the road is gone, obviously. So all that other stuff that I had planned this year has been canceled or postponed. So that's been very tough. But I'm sort of focusing on my print work, like, you know, organizing print sales and stuff like that, you know, because the whole thing has always been about passive income. Like, how do you get to a place where you can have passive income? And so for me, passive income is prints. And I've done really well with exhibitions, my Leica exhibitions and stuff. You know, had like broken records every time I did one for Leica. So, but now I've been organizing even stuff that I've always said I would do, like organizing and cataloging my collection. That's what I've been doing every day, cataloging my record collection, and like, you know, even to see like what I have. And because that stuff gets used a lot for projects. Like, people always come to me that, hey, we need this record for this reissue. You know, we're doing this Marvin Gaye thing, and they'll use like my collection of 45s in it, or the Prince 1999 box set that came out. A bunch of my collection is in that. There's a gatefold with all these records, like something I'd done for Prince in 2006 with this Ultimate Prince thing. So, you know, just basically right now is all about, first of all, figuring out a way to like reinvent myself a little bit, you know, maybe in the consulting and maybe people are asking me a lot about teaching and stuff, about doing courses.
Why? So tell me why are you thinking about doing that?
Well, paying bills for one, you know, like also, like I said, my son's at Bard, so I have to figure out a way to keep paying the bills, like everybody else in the country and the world right now is like panicking a little bit. You know, and I also have a big collection of stuff, so it's also organizing that and saying, hey, maybe I sell some of these things. Maybe the reason I've held on to some of these things is so I can sell them for, having a little less stress for a while. You just have to be real in this
Yeah.
time, and so I don't think it's anything like negative. I just think it's all about figuring out like, okay, what's the next step? I know I'll be on the road again. I know I'm talking to artists, the every day, friends, stuff. They're all jonesing to get back. It's just a matter of when it's going to be allowed. Right. But for me, it's also writing. Like there's certain things I've always wanted to write, and I've started writing a book years ago. And then that's sort of like I always joke about like a self-help book, but not really. But it's like for because my story, like when you get into it, it's kind of crazy. Like there's a lot of crazy coincidences that have happened that have brought me to where I am. There's a lot of real chase, and I jokingly always say like stalking, like somebody like Prince, somebody that was like stalking the person, but then ended up doing work or whatever. They saw I wasn't a crazy person, but and a lot of other people. And so I think the biggest part of my business that I have to develop is that basically my own legacy, like my archives and my print collection and stuff like that, and making that available to people. And so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I got one more question for you, then we'll wrap this up. Okay, last one here. So one thing that it seems to me that you're very good at is building a community and a network around you, right? And around your photos, around your activities, around your designs. It's how I found you, to be perfectly honest. Is I became a part of your network on Instagram, and inspired to reach out and contact you and have this conversation. And so my last question for you is what advice would you give others, whether they're designers or photographers or otherwise, to build their network? How should they go about building a network, and why is it important?
Well, it's important, especially these days, because I feel like people don't really look at websites anymore. That's everything is on Instagram, or now this like TikTok and this and Snapchat. I mean, I just do like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, but I really just do Instagram. Like everything posts everywhere, but I don't like individually really do stuff on Facebook and Twitter. But I think the importance is that's the only way to get your work seen, And I think people should not be afraid to reach out to people that inspire them and people that admire them. Like I'm always happy to, especially in times like this where I have a little more time to look at a portfolio and give advice. I did last, I don't know, it seems like 5 months ago or something, when Chappelle got the Mark Twain Prize and we were in DC. We did like a big masterclass at Duke Ellington, which is his arts high school. Yeah. And, I did a masterclass on basically on what I do, talking about photography and design and stuff. And I told the kids, like, just reach out because, looking at myself for an example, you have to go after, like, if you want to work with somebody, don't freak them out and send them scary stuff. But really, you really have to go after, like, if I decided like, I really want to design a poster for Jack White, and you have to find the connection. And that's a bad example because I'm good friends with Rob Jones, who's done most of the artwork for him and all the White Stripe stuff and all that. Yeah. But it took many years. Like, you have to be patient. It took many years for Rob to be like, knowing that I'm a fan and knowing that I collect the stuff, the vault. I'm a member of Jack White's vault and all that stuff. So Miles, my son, but to be like, hey, you want to design one of these posters? Like sometimes you have to know how to like subtly give people clues, but not. And then as far as the network, just only post like the best work. Like, don't just post everything. Like, one of the big problems I have today is people feeling like, they have to like post everything. They have to show everything, every meal, everything. Or like I find myself in quarantine. I've been cooking so much. I'm like, hey, this looks good. I post it, but it's stupid. But it's like, then other friends are like, oh my God, what's the recipe? But there's a little bit of a network thing to it. Even in there. But for like young artists and, the most important thing is finding your voice. Like, who are you as a photographer? Who are you as a designer? Who are you as a writer? Who are you as a speaker? Don't try to be somebody else, which is the other problem I have is people posting photos and like, this is my Avedon shot, this is my Herb Ritts shot, this is my blah blah blah. No, like, what's the point of that? I'd rather just go look at my Avedon book or Herb Ritts books, or look on the prints I have on the wall. Like, I want to be inspired by something new. So when a young artist, reaches out to people, you should make sure he or she make sure that what they're presenting is like the best they can present, because 99% of the times you have one shot. Like, if you're going to reach out to somebody, it's like if you're a recording artist and you send the head of a label a demo, and they're like, okay, I'll listen to your demo, and you send, they're like, this is pretty good, but I could do it better. They're never gonna give you a second shot. You know what I mean? If they already know you're submitting something that's not your best thing, it's not great, they're not gonna bother to hear the next version. So it's the same thing with this stuff. Is like, make sure that what you create is the best you can create, and keep working at it. If you're not ready to post something, don't post it. Like, if it means like, I might be better at this 4 or 5 months from now, then post photos of your dog and your meals, and 4 months from now, post like a great shot that you took, or.
Right.
But yeah, so I think it's the network thing builds itself. My Instagram was private for like my first 3 years, I think. So a lot of the time where I could have like built a really huge network, like while I was on the road with Lenny in the beginning, or all this stuff, or I was doing big thing, I still wanted to be private because I had pictures of my kids and they were younger and all that, But so I always think of that, like, if I'd always had an open account, maybe I would have blah blah blah. But it's also not so much about the numbers. Like, people get so stuck on numbers. Like, I see people hiring, models and stuff just based on the follower count, not so much on what they look like, or what they could bring to the brand. Sure. So that's a bit of a shame in this era.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. I think this quarantine, this pandemic thing is actually kind of changing the whole influencer thing, because people are just, they're just like, who cares? Like, I don't really.
What's important is really coming through, I think, as we're filtering this out. Listen, Mathieu, thanks so much for doing this and for your insight and your story. This was amazing. There's a lot of great stuff in here, and I appreciate your time doing this.
Yeah, man. I look forward to reading your book.